Welcome. Today we're going to learn how to make a basic patchwork quilt. And a quilt, by definition, is 3 layers of fabric. A top that can be patchwork or applique or embroidery. And then inside where you can't see it is a batting. It's kind of a fiber fill that gives its thickness. And then there's a backing, something that goes on the back that holds all the pieces together. And today, through this series, this class, we're going to learn how to make a patchwork top and make it into a quilt, piecing it by machine and quilting it by hand. So the basic block that we're going to use is a 4-patch. A 4-patch means that if you take a square, and the names of quilts pretty much from old days, from the 1700s when patchwork quilting was really started, they just named the blocks by what they look like. So this is a patch of 4 patches together, so it's called a 4-patch. And we're going to learn to make a 4-patch that is an alternate with a solid block. And even though this is a print fabric, this is one big solid block. So this whole quilt pattern is called an alternate block 4-patch. So can you see that there? Okay. So we're going to learn to do a 4-patch, but we also can look at this quilt, and this quilt has what's called a 9-patch. So if you look and count these up, there are 9 patches in the block. And this quilt also is an alternate block. There's a solid denim block, and then every other one is a patchwork block. And by the way, this quilt is a quilt of my mother's materials. So my mother's been deceased for quite a while, but these are materials from her that help me always remember and think of her. So this is a alternate 9-patch quilt. Now just to show you one more example, this is also a 9-patch. This is a very old quilt that I made circa like 1979. You know that circa means we don't really exactly remember the date, but it's around the right date. And this is a 9-patch. Hopefully you can see it. It's very tiny. And then this is a 9-patch that alternates to make a double 9-patch. So this is called a 9-patch, double 9-patch. And then to make it even more interesting, this quilt is put on the diagonal. The blocks are on the diagonal to make a much more, you see, when you look at this quilt, you just see this overall pattern of this chain of fabric, when really it's just a simple 9-patch by 9-patch. If you've never made a quilt before, my favorite size for a beginner for a first-time quilt is a 60-inch square or thereabouts. It's a great throw. It's great. You can put it on a table. You can use it at the bottom of your bed, on the couch. If you have a lot of experience with quilts, or you really want a quilt that's going to fit the size of your bed, then you can do that too and figure out what the size of your bed is. Say if it's a queen mattress is 60 by 80, and then you have to add around the edges so that it falls over the bedside. But I'm going to give you a handout that really explains all that and helps you figure out what size quilt you're going to make. And then once you decide what size quilt you're going to make, you're going to start to gather your materials. Now, my materials, one of the great things about a 4-patch and an alternate 4-patch that we're going to make is it's a great way to use up little pieces of fabric and scrap pieces of fabric. And if you look back here, this is my fabric stash. This is where I keep all of my fabrics, and they're arranged by color, and they're also arranged by materials. Like I have all the t-shirt scraps and all the quilting fabric scraps. So for this project, because I wanted to make it a little simpler and not so complicated, I'm using yardage, and I'm using mostly quilters materials that are 100% cotton that you can buy in a quilt shop or online. It's really easy to get a good selection, but maybe you already have a little stash. So then I went into my stash, and what I picked was just really some ends of my most favorite beautiful fabrics. Like batiks are very popular, and I have this beautiful purple batik. It has this nice spiral on it. I love these facet fabrics that they have these very beautiful colored flowers. And I went through and picked out just a bunch of them, whatever I could find that I liked. And that's what I'm going to use for the little squares. But then the most important part of this quilt, because there's so much of it, and this is something that you need yardage for, is the alternate part. And also it ends up the border, and it's really what's going to set off these fabrics. And the first thing I got out was an old sheet I have. It's like a denim sheet, and it's a blue woven. It's really quite nice and soft and used. And I thought, well, that'd be great. I have it. You need a lot of it. Again, I'll give you the yardages that'll be on the paper that's attached to this. But I don't know, I felt like it could be more contrasting and it would be more interesting. And then a friend of mine just gave me these old tablecloths, and they're cotton too, cotton tablecloths. And I thought, wow, these would really set it off very nicely. And then I started to kind of change the project that I wanted to do, because I would like, actually, it would be fun for me to make a patchwork tablecloth using the tablecloth and using these patches. And I thought, well, I could do that with you. I could do kind of a variation again of this and make a tablecloth, but I really want to teach you to make a quilt, and I want to go through all the steps of a quilt. So then I went to one more fabric, and this is a fabric that I buy in yardage. It's a raw silk. It's really has a great texture to it. I made it for quilts, used it for quilts before. I have a lot of it. I buy 5 or 6 yards at a time, and it's also not as stark white as this, but it's a really nice cream and much more contrast than the blue. So that's what I'm going to use. And also you're going to need yardage for backing, and again, that will be in the information. We'll talk about that more as we go on. But for me, I'm going to use leftover fabrics that I can cut and make into a backing, and that's what this is for. I don't expect you to do that, but you will need a backing, and we'll talk about that more as we go on. But time to select your fabrics. We're ready to cut our quilt. We're going to make a 60-inch square throw quilt, and it's going to be an alternate 4-patch. This is the 4-patch, just 2 colored blocks and 2 solid blocks, and then it will alternate with this block. These are 4 inches finished, these blocks, the solid blocks, and I just started a little block just to give you an idea so that you know what it looks like. And in order to figure out exactly how much cutting we have to do, I use a notebook where I figure out exactly what size quilt I'm going to make and how I'm going to add seam allowances and how much fabric. And so I have all that on a handout, which is beside this lesson. So I figured out that we need, for this quilt, we need to make 85 of these blocks and 84 of these blocks. And if you look over here, you'll see that I've done most of the cutting already. I had 15 different colored fabrics, and I figured out that I needed 12 of each of those, and they're all here. And now I'm going to show you how to cut the last one, just so you see how I do my cutting. What I do is I take the yardage and I line up the selvages and then line them up to the fold, so it's a very manageable piece of fabric. And then I line up the fold to the edge of the grid on the board, and then I just cut off a little bit extra to make sure that I'm working on a solid edge. And now these are 2-inch blocks finished, so that means when you cut it, you have to cut 2.5. It's a 1/4-inch seam allowances in quilting. And so I'm going to take this, put the ruler at 2.5, and cut it this way. And then I'm going to take the folded pieces. I need 12, so maybe I'm going to be able to get 12 out of this strip. So what I'm going to do first again is even off the edge. And now I'm cutting 4 at one time. So this is 4, 8, 12, and this is a little extra in case I need it. And here I am, all of my blocks ready to start sewing. I'm at the sewing machine, and now we're going to make the 4-patch blocks. Remember, we're going to make these blocks. So what you do is you take one solid piece and one print piece, and you'll mix them up as you go along, the prints. You put the right sides together, the prints on the right, it goes right sides together. You sew it in a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now don't lift the presser foot, don't cut the thread, and if the colored one is up, for this next one I'll put the colored block down and the solid one on top. So what I'm doing is alternating them. And again, I'm going to keep the 1/4 inch seam allowance and keep on going. And now I'm going to take another one. Right side's up, the solid is on the bottom, the print is on the top, or colored, and going this way. And you're going to just keep on going like this. This is going to take a long time. Listen to some good music, have fun with it. This colored one is on the bottom, the light one is on the top, and you're going to keep on going. Now I've done 2 blocks, and I'm going to just keep on going like that until I have put all of the blocks into 2 sets. And then what happens is you'll come back and you'll open them up and you'll cut them apart in 2s, and you'll see that they can now be sewn together as a patchwork block. Now people ask me, should you press it? And really it's better not to press it till the very end, because what happens is when you sew these 2 blocks together, you can feel the seam allowances and you can make sure that they meet, and they meet really nicely by pressing them in opposite directions, which you can do with your finger. So then you would take all of these and put them through. So I haven't done too many, so I don't have too many to put through, but just again, just to show you, you open it up, make sure that they're opposite, right sides together, make sure the seams are butting up to each other, and keep on going. And you can go all the way through until you've made, here's another set that I had started earlier. So again, when everything is in 2s, then you're going to make it into 4s. You have to make sure that the blocks are opposite, put them together, butt up the seam allowances with your finger, and go all the way through. And when you're done making 84 of these, cut them apart, open them up, and we'll be ready to go on to the next step. We've pieced all the blocks. They're piled up here. These are the solid blocks. And what we're going to do is make a grid of 13 blocks by 13 blocks. So I did the first row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And we're going to alternate every other block. So here's a patchwork block and then a solid block. So now this is row 1, this is row 2, and they stay together. They're like a flag. And now I'm going to add on row 3. So first I'll go patchwork block, line it up, put it in, do the 1/4 inch. Don't lift the presser foot, don't cut the thread. If I have a patchwork block, the next one's going to be a solid block. I'm going to go all the way down 13 times for this 3rd row. Every other one, patchwork solid, patchwork solid. So I think you get the idea. That's the next step. I've been having a good time at the sewing machine, and now I have made all the rows. It's 13 blocks by 13 blocks, 13 going this way and 13 down. It alternates between the 4 patch and the solid block. And now it's very easy for me to go back and sew it across the other way because they're kind of attached and I know exactly where it's going to go. So I can line up the edges and sew the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I can rotate the way the seams go so that I can make sure I get a perfect match all the way along. And I did the last 2 rows. I already sewed them together so you could see how nice it looks. When you've completed all that, you can iron the whole top. And then what we're going to do is add borders. What we're going to do is add a 4-inch border all the way around. And I have 4 extra 4 patches. They'll go at each corner. And what you're going to do is measure across And it should be, this is a square, so whatever this measures, and this measures 54, I could measure it a couple more times and the other way, and maybe one side might measure 54 and a half, one side might measure 54 and a quarter, but what you'll do is take the average, because what we're going to do is make it fit. And one great thing about putting on borders is that it kind of squares up the quilt, and if you're a little off in your seam allowances, it takes care of all those problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, I made a big length of 4.5-inch strips, and I'm going to sew those. I'm going to cut those into 54-inch lengths. So just to go a little bit step further so you can understand that, I have another quilt top that I've made. It's a variation of this quilt, and I used this is going to be a big quilt. It's for a queen size bed. So I wanted to get a little bit more yardage, get a little bit more power out of my 4 patches. So what I did was make a 4 patch in a 9 patch, and then I alternated that to a solid block. But and also I put on the diagonal, but that's a whole nother lesson. Another time you'll learn to do diagonals. And then I have already cut the border for this one. This is going to be a 12-inch border because this is a 12-inch block. So what I did was I take it and I pin one end, and then I pin the other end, and then I kind of ease it in to make it fit. And what you do is, you know, the borders are straight and even, and you know you cut them all the same. So if you make the patchwork fit into the borders, again, you'll have a really nice squared off quilt. I thought you'd like to see the larger quilt top finished, so I put it on the wall for you to see it. And you real clearly, you can see the 9 patch, the 4 patches that come together with 4, there's 4 patches that come together with 4 solids, 9 patch, alternate blocks, and then the triangles that put it on an angle. And I just mentioned before that putting on an angle is like a whole nother lesson. And the reason it's another lesson is because we have to learn about triangles. And this quilt that I was just trying to teach you, this is about squares. So in another whole lesson we'll make a quilt that's made out of triangles, and you'll learn all those rules. But also then you can see that this quilt is all marked and ready to quilt, and that's what we're going to do now. This is the 4 patch top, the smaller one that's finished. You can see that I added the border, and I have a 4 patch square in each corner. And when you're finished doing all of the piecing, you can press the top from the front so you can see that you like the way it looks. And this is the last time that you will press it, maybe the only time that you pressed it. And the next thing to do is decide how you're going to quilt your quilt. I'm going to teach you how to hand quilt it. And for this quilt, I use stencils, and also you can just draw lines. But I picked this stencil for the border. It's a cable, a simple cable. And I also found some flowers that I'm going to use in each of the blocks. Then I mark it with a chalk pencil, and you want to be careful to use a pencil that will wash out, like you should never use ink, or they have special pencils that are called water-soluble marking pencils, and that's what you should use to mark the top of your quilt. When you've done your marking, then you have to get a batting, and for this quilt I'm using a 80%, 20% quilter's bat. I like it a lot. It's very thin and flat. Here's some extra pieces of it that you can see. And what you're going to do is you have to make a backing. So if this is a 60-inch square, you have to make a backing that's about 66 inches square, and I already did that. You can buy quilter's backing at the fabric store, and they're like 90 inches wide, and then you can cut it down. But I pieced a backing, so if you're going to piece it, this is the backing. It's like a couple different fabrics that I pieced together. If you're going to piece it, you have to be, whatever the size of your quilt is, it should be about 4 inches bigger all the way around. So then what you do is lay out your backing, lay out your batting, one full layer, and lay out your top. And again, you're going to see you're going to have some extra all the way around the edges. And this is a quilting frame. We use this for hand quilting. You need to create a little bit of a tension to do the hand quilting. This is quilting thread. Quilting thread is special. It has a silicone finish on it, and it makes it a little stronger and keeps it from knotting while you're working on it. And then you're going to use a quilting needle. It's called a between, and a between is shorter than a regular needle, and it's shorter so that you can move it in and out more easily. And I use a 8. Really skilled quilters sometimes go into a 9, a 10. I've even seen women that use a 12. And then, so whatever needle, you can start with a 7 even if you've never quilted before till you get comfortable with it. And what you do is take the thread off and put it on the needle, and then you're going to knot one end of it. And the thing about quilting is that we want to always hide the knots. We don't want to see the knots on the front or the back. And by the way, I have to use a thimble. This is a leather thimble. You can use any kind of thimble that you like, but you really need something because your finger pushes the needle through the thread. So now I'm going to show you how to hide the knot. So what you do is, and generally I do this from the back, but because I want you to see it, I'm doing it from the front. So you go away from where you want to start your needle, and you bring it up into where you want to start it. And then the knot is here. Well, that's really ugly. So we have to, and not safe, so we pop the knot. So I popped the knot and it went through to the fabric, and now it's stuck in between the batting. And then a quilting, line of quilting is a back and forth thread. I think for you, if you're just quilting for the first time, it's important to make the stitches even. Don't worry if they're too small or too big, but I'm using my finger up for underneath and my finger on top to pull it through. And you see I'm going across the diagonal of this square because it will show up very nicely, the quilting, and look very pretty. And then when you're ready to end the thread, I wouldn't end it, I would keep on going, but just to show you how to end it, you go all the way down and you come all the way back up at the beginning of the thread. You take your needle and you make a knot very close to the edge. It's just one little knot. Go back in the same hole, pull your needle away and pop it, and there you have it, a hand quilting stitch. I'll try to go over that again another time. I'm sure you can look that up online if you want to look at how to do it, and some more pieces of, matter of fact, I'll do another teaching a little bit later on which goes into that more thoroughly, but that's good enough to get you started. And then also, I can't really do it right now, but finally after the whole thing is quilted, we work our way out and around and do all the hand quilting. And when it's done, we're going to bind it. That'll be the last step of our quilt. And so a binding is a 2.5 inch strip that's double. And what you do is you cut the backing and the batting so it's even. And then you take the binding and you double it and you sew it by machine through all the layers. And then you turn it and sew it to the front. And you have made a really beautiful alternate